Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Motorsport Experience Podcast. This podcast is designed to share the love of riding and to share inspiration that we get from riding or motorsports, any kind of motorsports. And in this episode, we're here with Stephanie. I will let her introduce herself, but she's an awesome rider, and we'll go from there. So, Stephanie, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi there, I'm Stephanie Yankovich, and I'm an awesome writer. I love the introduction, Pauline. Thank you so much. I don't know if awesome is the right word, but I'm certainly a passionate writer and try my hardest. But yeah, I'm located here in Toronto, and I'm a full-time registered massage therapist, and I do that to support my dirt bike habit. And yeah, try and ride as much as possible here in Ontario and also in the US when we can. And yeah, that's me.
That's pretty much anybody who rides is an awesome rider in my books. I ride on the street for now, haven't been able to make it to the trail yet, but whoever is riding, it's not really a habit, it's kind of an addiction. We have a bug for riding. So this is kind of how it goes. So I want to go over a couple of events that you recently did. I met you first at the Dacre 24-hour endurance rally, which was insane and awesome. And then you also did the next weekend rally somewhere else. So maybe we can look at those experiences and see what they were like for you. And just how did you get into riding in the first place, and the rally, the Dacre rally itself?
So I started riding when I met my partner, Ian Peters, almost 10 years ago. And he got me involved in the sport. I had my motorcycle license, but I didn't have a street bike. So I had gotten my license just because I was interested in my late 30s, and I had borrowed a friend's bike, periodically, but I wasn't a rider. And ironically, I met Ian the month that my license expired, and so he took me out one day. He was working on the Corduroy Enduro, cutting or cleaning up some trails for that race in the fall. And he had a little Honda 100. And while he was clearing trail, he said, "Why don't you go ride?" And we were in Somerville Forest at the time. And so off I went. And I think it was at the same time both the most exhilarating and the most terrifying experience I'd ever had. But I was hooked quite quickly. And for the first couple of years, I didn't ride a ton. We'd ride, every couple of weeks. And then once I got a little more competent, we started to ride more and more. And I think now he would claim that he created a monster. He's probably regretting his choice of introducing me to the sport, especially after events like the Dacre and the Northeast 24-hour, because of course he was very generous to give up his ride and be my pit crew for those events. So he has to do all the hard work, but doesn't get any of the glory for either of those events. But yeah, he introduced me to the sport, and I'm forever grateful. He's also my mechanic, and I always joke, my Sherpa. And that's actually what made the Dacre in particular, such an interesting event for me, because I haven't ever ridden alone. It's not something I encourage people to do. A lot of the enjoyment I get from riding is the social aspect of it, and getting to ride with friends. And so for me, that was a part of the challenge, was to do a solo endeavor and to do one that was that sustained for such a long period of time. And I'm actually going to blame John Boisvenu with Valley Rally Enduro for actually getting me to the Dacre, because I had decided maybe over last winter that I'd be very interested in doing the Dacre. It's always been on my radar. But I hadn't considered riding it solo. I thought of maybe doing it with Ian before. I don't know what his interest level was, though, in that. And we went up to Sunny Hill Resort and over New Year's and hung out with the Valley Rally guys. And I was doing a podcast with Laura Penwell, with Rally Connects, and myself. And John Boisvenu called me out and said, "Are you going to be doing the Dacre?" And I hadn't been prepared to announce that I was going to do the Dacre, because then you're committed. And he called me out. So I had to agree at that point, spur of the moment, to do it. And so actually he was probably responsible for getting me to commit at that point in time. And then there was no looking back. I had no choice. So
That's pretty exciting. I keep thinking of the quote, it's in the moment of decision that the destiny is made, or something like that. And it really makes a point to mention that we have to make decisions often on the spot for the experiences. We have no idea how they're going to turn out, but most of the time they turn out amazing because we made that decision. So that is very exciting. And I remember seeing Ian come in after you because you came pretty late at night, and it was incredible to see the like one of the reasons why you were able to do the whole thing, I think, is because you had that support person. How was it? What was it like for you? Because the thing started at 4 a.m. in the morning, and you came, I think, you came 30 seconds before the cutoff day time.
Yep. It was long. I'd anticipated riding about 20 hours. And I had kind of thought that that would be the maximum, because you don't get the route files until the day of the event, or the afternoon of the event. You really don't know what your total distance is going to be. You don't know what the course is going to be. So it's not only physically and mentally challenging just to be riding for that period of time, but I have to tell you that the probably one of the biggest challenges was managing my anxiety for like the 6 months leading up to this event, because for me it's GPS guided, and I don't often ride with a GPS, so that was a whole another level of complexity that I had to try and navigate, no pun intended. And not knowing your route, I like to be prepared. I think I'm flexible, but you know what, surprises aren't always awesome. So that was quite challenging. And then to be able to coordinate that with Ian, with my Czech crew, or solo Czech crew, I relied a lot on him, and I kind of left it up to him to decide how he wanted to handle that. And I said I'd like to see him at all the checkpoints. I also wasn't sure how far my bike would go on a tank of gas, so in preparation, I carried gas with me. We tried to capitalize on that. So I can't tell you how motivating it was, because a lot of the sections that Lee laid out were quite long. Like the first one was 118 kilometers, which for many is a normal full day ride, right? And I did actually have to use one of my gas canisters on that first section in the morning. But to be able to, what Ian tried to do was, when there was an opportunity to meet me halfway through a Czech section, when some of the trail crossed a road, for example, I would come out of the woods and the van would just be there. And he I don't think I even had any expectations, but he blew me away with how organized he was. There was food there waiting for me. I was able to get my bike gas, my hydration pack refilled, so that I could try and ride as quickly as possible and check, and gas as quickly as possible and get back on the road. Because I did know the challenge for me. I'm not the fastest rider. We were told about the cutoff point at about 7 o'clock at night. There's a check, I forget which check it was, whether it was maybe 7 or 8, and that you had to make that by 7 o'clock. So keep the wheels rolling, keep moving. And I didn't anticipate the challenge of the section leading up to that check, and I saw the clock creeping. And I think I rolled into that check at about 6:42. I remember distinctly. And I saw Owen Chapman's dad there, and was so happy to see him and know that I'd made that deadline. And then I found out that Lee extended that deadline by about 30 minutes. So, but at that point, I started to feel more pressure about getting the race or the event completed within the 24-hour window. So, as you stated, I came down to the wire. I would have been heartbroken if I had come in a minute later and been cut off. But you know what? We started in waves, so I didn't actually start until sometime after 4 a.m. So I was ready to defend, that. But I'm just really pleased to have finished and made it just under the wire. And yeah, but I couldn't have done it without Ian. It was just the emotional support that I would have, because I did the ride on my own, like you're out there by yourself, and which is both empowering and exhilarating and frightening at times, if you think too hard about how alone you are. And so it was really wonderful to see him at the surprise opportunities that we could find along the way. So yeah, I couldn't have done it without him.
Yeah, that sounds like a dream partner. Absolutely.
Yeah.
To have that type of support on this long of a journey. Absolutely. And so you mentioned that you had anxiety 6 months before. Did you do anything about it? Or did you just kind of roll through the waves of it and just kind of waited it out?
No, I actually actively tried uh, to manage it. I don't consider myself an anxious person, but my controlling qualities probably mean that I need to better manage my stress around these things, and I put a lot of pressure on myself to to do well, and so with this event though it was a complete unknown for me. So I hadn't ridden it before. I knew how challenging it was. I knew riders that have both successfully completed it and who haven't successfully completed it. And so, going back to a point you made earlier, when I make decisions, I sometimes just say yes. That's sort of one of my mantras is say yes, and then figure out how you're going to make that happen. Because I don't want to not do things because of anxiety or fear, for the right opportunity, because that right opportunity will never come along. You have to make that opportunity. So whether it's racing that I do here in Ontario, whether it's challenging work related stuff, or an event like this, I tend to obsess and get anxious about it leading up to the event. And sometimes that's a week before, and a lot of the time though, like this one, it's a long time before. So a lot of my preparation and the challenge around this event was mental preparation. And so I'm a big fan of reading coaching books and performance books. So I read a lot about having a winning attitude and how to overcome that kind of performance anxiety, that sort of thing. And so that I found very helpful. It doesn't get rid of the anxiety, but it helps to make it manageable so that I'm not wasting that energy being concerned about that when I could be putting that energy into something that's more practical. And that also very much carried through the actual event itself. I needed to ride conservatively. That doesn't mean slow. I had to keep moving and probably push myself to move faster than I normally would have. But be conservative in the risks that I took, because you're by yourself. And I feel that that's something that I managed quite well, and I didn't have a lot of room or bandwidth to stress about things that I couldn't control. I tried to prepare mentally and physically before the event, and then at that point, just enjoy the ride and keep moving, and hope that I'm able to finish, and that I knew I wasn't going to quit, but I didn't know how much of a challenge it was going to be for me, emotionally and mentally. And so that was what the interesting experiment for me. And whether, my physical preparation would be adequate. I mean, I'm a middle-aged woman, who's always struggling with fitness and weight. So for me, I had a lot of help from Steve McGill with Thrash Motoco, to help with some of the physical preparation and also the mental preparation and hydration, and just he was a very great cheerleader and helped me be accountable. And so I attribute a lot of that to him. But definitely, reading about other people and how they handle that type of anxiety was really really helpful for me, and prepared me mentally for the experience.
Yeah, I absolutely hear you on the aspect of reading the books and the coaching books. I'm all about that. And I've heard oftentimes that athletes have anxiety the night before the race, night before the event. But I actually haven't considered a long term effect of that anxiety. And the curious thing that I always like to think about is the fact that in our brain, the signature for fear and signature for excitement are exactly the same. So we can
Yeah.
reframe and bounce between the two. We're anxious or we're excited, which is the similar thing. And so I wonder if there was any of the anxiety that transferred over to the actual ride itself.
So there was definitely anxiety, but so my mental approach to the ride, I realized I couldn't look at it in its entirety ever, because it's too overwhelming. I had to look at it, and I kind of broke it down to one checkpoint at a time. And then even within, like, some of those checkpoints were 3 to 4 hours of riding away from one another. So you can't maintain that heightened excitability for that period of time without fatiguing yourself. And so I tried to break it down into small, manageable chunks. And something else too. I'm a sort of a fan of. I used to think about, thinking about performance and winning and that type of thing. And then I was. I really enjoyed Ben Bergeron's book. He's a CrossFit athlete trainer, one of the best in the world, and he encouraged his athletes to do their best. And that doesn't, I mean, you may be the winner on the day, you may achieve your goal on the day, but if you give it 100%, then that's all you can do. So the result shouldn't matter. It's the effort involved. And then there's also another great book, with winning in mind, by Lani Bishan, who's actually a target shooter. And it's an older book, but it's really excellent because it talks about not, again, thinking about winning and the pressure of that win, or the end result. It's about doing a winning performance. So for me, it's like, all I can do is my best. I need to try and mitigate any risk when it comes to riding. I don't want to have to pick up my bike a lot. I don't want to be injured. I need to, if I have to stop and look at my line selection to pick the best line choice to conserve energy that way, I need to do that, and not think about the end result. Think about each step of the way, and otherwise, you know, it's it's the enormity of that undertaking is crazy when you think about it. And by doing that, I feel that I was able to maintain my focus and energy for the whole 24 hours, and that helped immensely.
That is actually a really good strategy to shorten the timeline. And it's been suggested by multiple people whenever we're facing something so difficult that we can't bear to think about it. We got to shorten the timeline to the smallest chunk that we can deal with. Maybe it's a day, maybe it's a week, maybe it's an hour, maybe it's 100 kilometers. So in this case, it seems like a perfect example of that technique to shorten the timeline, to not make it too overwhelming. And so my question to that is, did you notice any shifts of the focus throughout the day, even though you were using that technique of breaking down the things that into chunks? Was there noticeable lows or highs of the focus?
Of course, there were, I think, because you can't. It's hard to maintain, and I think the other riders that you've interviewed have said the same thing. It's virtually impossible to maintain that level of focus the whole time. I will say though, thanks to Lee and how challenging he made the silver class for me, I you have to stay focused. There's not a lot of options, right? Like I was really surprised at how the mental clarity that I had for, I would say, like the first 15 hours. I felt amazing. I have energy. I'm very lucky, for whatever reason, that I don't get arm pump a lot when I ride. I'm very soft with my hands. So I had initial anxiety at 3 a.m. when I woke and started the event, and riding in the dark first thing, and also combining that with navigating with my GPS. That was a lot of stress for me right off the bat. But you know, this time of year, by 6 o'clock in the morning, the light was there, and so you feel this energy come with that. And I would say that I felt like 100% for at least the first 15 hours. And part of that mental prep was that, um, and maybe the reason why I do these, or I find these hard things to do for myself, is because I'm okay being uncomfortable, whether it's fatigue or hunger, although I'm not often hungry, or just I've been fortunate to be involved in lots of sports, get injuries, there's pain. I'm over 50 years old, so my joints hurt. And so it being able to push yourself and be comfortable with being uncomfortable, is important. So for me, there wasn't an option to stop. There wasn't an option not to finish this event. I knew I had to do all the miles, so there's no point in thinking about how many miles those were. So for me, I had lots of energy for the majority of the day. I hydrated really well, too well. I had to stop and pee so many times. It wasn't funny, but rather that than dehydrate. I was able to eat, although you don't have a lot of appetite. I didn't have a lot of appetite when you're riding like that. But I had, the right mixture of food. Though there was a lot of luck involved. The weather was cooperative. It was amazing. There were water holes that one very early in the morning in the dark that Etienne was talking about, and I think I actually passed him in that hole. He told me to stick to the right, and I appreciate him doing that. But so that was intimidating, but all in all, the trails were amazing, and so all the conditions contrived to make it as good as it could be. And then I was very lucky with how I felt. And I would say, though, that shift, though, that happened in attention and focus, and I kind of started to let some fear and anxiety creep in. After we'd gone through the section that takes you through Algonquin, there's a section that's quite difficult with a really sketchy bridge crossing. You actually should ride the rocks to the left of the bridge. And I struggled with that section, and there was a lot of discussion with Ian before I started that leg, that it's dark again at this point. It's late. I think it was probably after midnight by this point. And that, he was concerned for me and my safety going through that section. And I finally, said, okay, you know what? I need to get moving, and I'm just going to do it. And I did. But that was kind of a point where my attitude shifted for a while. And if there was going to be a point where I was questioning myself or my ability to finish, that's the point at which it came. And I actually ended up getting stuck at that point. I came in and I ignored my own advice about, stopping and looking at obstacles, picking the right line. And I made a mistake where I came in to the right of that bridge, and I kind of went into the water and got my wheel stuck in the bridge. And I thought, that's it, my event is over at this point. And so I had to manage that. And it was really interesting. I stopped, I took a breath or three, and then I had to kind of problem solve and figure out how I could get my bike unstuck on my own, turn myself around in that water, and I was back up on the bank. I was able to stop and go walk to the left, and discovered, yes, there's a big rocky section, but the rocks are not hard to ride. And once I got through that turned that negative attitude around again for me. So I found that was probably sort of the darkest period of the ride, but it was short. And at that point, it's like, I'm doing this. And, that was probably the most challenging moment or minutes for me in that ride, was at that point. So
That sounds fascinating, because the way that I think about it, when we faced with a challenge, neurobiologically, if we are actually say yes to that challenge, we produce more dopamine. So it's almost like you had to have this challenge happen in order to give you a second win to finish off the rest of the event. Very
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, there were a couple of pivotal moments, and I remember when we had our lunch stop, which for me was at like 4:30 in the afternoon, at Sunny Hill Resort. I have been lucky enough to spend a bit of time riding those trails there, and they're really challenging. And because we've done all the OVR events that they've put on, and so I was excited to ride that, because it's like, oh, this isn't going to be a surprise. I know these trails, and I know how hard they are. And at the same time, it was daunting because I'd never ridden them alone, and I know where the sticking points are for me on all those trails, and where I've struggled sometimes in the past to get through. So I was both excited and anxious about that. And so Ian said that he would meet me after I got through the first little section of single track at Sunny Hill. And I remember riding it, and honestly, it was like the best I've ever ridden it. And again, conditions were dry. That makes a big difference for traction, especially on Silent Hill, which is quite a steep, slippery downhill. And I managed to get through all of it. There were a couple of points where I came to a stop on a hill, but I was able to get myself going again. And I was so energized and ecstatic and proud of myself. And I come out of the woods, and there's Ian, and I'm just like bouncing on my bike. I'm so excited. And, he says, well done, great. I'm going to go meet you at the next checkpoint, and off I go. And this is the checkpoint that's, where they have the cutoff, and it's after 5 o'clock and probably closer to 6 at this point. Anyway, and then I thought I was done with the Sunny Hill stuff at that point, and I was so happy. And then they sent us in to this whole new hill section that I had ridden only once the last time I was there, and it's hard. And so all of a sudden, that energy that I had went plummeting again, and I was no longer thrilled with myself. And I thought, oh, this is going to be tough. So I would say from that point on, there were more ups and downs and more variation in my mood and my energy for the remainder of that ride. So from 5 or 6 o'clock onwards, I felt that the event now felt more like a race, and it was a race against time for sure, and a race against myself. So the first 2/3, it was all amazing, but the first 2/3 I felt like $1,000,000, and then I started to have to more manage my energy and my resources for the last third of the ride.
Yeah, it's fascinating how everything about this experience, or majority of it, was all mindset. For everybody that I talked to so far, mindset is the key. How we perceive things, how we think about the challenges, how we're going to approach something, how we view the long-term effect of it. It's just fascinating how so much of it is just in our heads.
Yeah. I would say, like, obviously you need a baseline of physical preparedness. And I think, as some of the other riders have said, like, you're never going to be completely ready. And I struggle with consistency when it comes to that. So that's always a goal or a work in progress for me. But I also knew, like, I've done a lot of longer rides this season, and we've done a lot of events back to back on Saturdays and Sundays. So I had ridden 15, 16 hours over those 2 days. And much like training for a marathon, you don't run a marathon to train for a marathon. You prepare, and build up your endurance. So I knew I had an adequate base of that, but I also knew that it was that I would say at least 75% of it, if not maybe even 90%, is mental. And our bodies can do amazing things. But it's our brain that interferes with that, and that is the limiter for that. So if I could manage the mental strategy for this, and that was my test, because I didn't know. I didn't know if I could do it or not. I didn't know how hard it would be for me, because everybody's perception and experience is different. So, but I would agree with you. It's mostly a mental challenge more than a physical one.
Yeah, and physically also, I suspect that because of those fluctuations in focus and energy level and those exciting moments, there's constant addition of endorphins that happens throughout the
Mhm.
ride that probably dulls down the pain enough for the journey to continue.
Yes. And I mean, so I have joint pain. I mean, I wake up with it, and but again, I'm also, I have a high tolerance for that. And you just, I know it's not um a danger to me. It's not an injury. It's just, older joints that get used a lot. So my concerns were my right knee, especially when I sit a lot on my dirt bike, gets quite uncomfortable. So I typically stand all the time when I ride. I knew I couldn't do that though for this event. So that I was concerned about, and it actually proved to be, it worked out really great. My hands can get sore, again, joint pain, not muscular pain. I chose not to change my outfit because I was feeling quite comfortable. So I didn't actually change my gear the entire ride, but making sure that there was no rubbing or chafing, that type of thing was really critical. Because if you get that little nagging, injury or pain point, it can ruin your entire ride. So everything worked out quite well in that regard. And yeah, so physically, it wasn't a huge. I shouldn't say that. It was hard, but it was the mental challenge more than anything.
Yeah, it's true. Sometimes the bodies give us those pains and issues that really affect, but it's great to know that for this specific thing it worked. And my next question would be around the nature itself, because the whole ride was done through the most beautiful scenery in Ontario. And what was it like? So we have these discomforts in our body, we have anxiety and high moments and low moments in our mind. But at the same time, you are watching the most beautiful nature open up in front of you. What was it like to see consistent changes that gets better and better from what I hear from others?
Yeah, it's beautiful and it is invigorating as well. The dawn was beautiful. I um I remember once I was able to turn my lights off in the morning, and the sun started to come up. We were in a section where there were a lot of birch trees, and the sunlight coming through the birch trees was absolutely stunning. And I kept, coming around corners and seeing this beautiful tableau and thinking, oh, I've got to stop and take a picture. And then it's like, no, I got to keep going because I don't have time. And then, oh no, here's another beautiful picture. And I ended up missing all of those beautiful pictures, but I have the experience to remember. And I also don't know, I assume with road riding that you experience this where you go through, valleys and where the temperature changes, or you are riding through an area with, a plant that smells. So like there were patches where we rode through and you smell these wild herbs. And so there's a lot of, you're very involved in your environment when you're riding your dirt bike. And so enough to jar you out of your focus and take in the scenery. And then at nighttime again, I couldn't believe the wildlife. There were deer that I encountered. There were so many bunnies, like families of bunnies. And of course, you don't want to kill any of them while you're you're riding, so you slow down. And then at one point, I come around a corner and I thought it was a skunk. All I see is this black and white, but thankfully it was a porcupine. And I chased this guy down the trail and he wouldn't, veer off the trail. So I had to slow down. And his butt's, wobbling as I've never seen a porcupine run so fast. And he's waddling along. And anyway, he finally, but I mean, that was at a pretty dark stage. That was shortly after that bridge incident. And it lifts you up and it just makes you realize how small a cog you are in all of the nature that's around you. Um, but how blessed you are to be part of that. So yeah, and I got to experience those things. Who else can say they did that except for the other, entrance at the Dacre this year? So it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I totally hear you on the aspect of going through different scenery and different smells. Like the smells when I ride is the biggest thing that I love the most. Sometimes
Mhm.
you go through the forest and you just smell everything. And because you're going faster than walking, it's almost like all that smell is being pushed into you, into your helmet. It's the most beautiful experience. And I also know because from experience, I take photos, and when I take photos, I'm not able to appreciate the scenery as much. And
Mhm.
so it's almost like I'm glad that when I'm on the bike, I can take the photos, because if I did, I wouldn't absorb it. So
Oh.
I actually stopped trying to take the photos of everything because they never turn out as well anyway from the photo. And I try to remember by looking at things when I ride, and especially the big sky and the light, the way it changes. It's really quite unbelievable what we can do. And I keep
Mhm.
reminding myself that we're so fortunate and lucky to have machines to get us so far into the nature on such a short notice, on such a short amount of time, and allow us to see
Mhm.
so much at once.
Yep. No, for sure. Um, Having said that, there were a lot of eyes in the dark that your helmet lights reflect off of, and you don't ever see what those eyes are attached to. That was a little creepy at times. And Ian mentioned to me again around the Algonquin area that he was listening to wolves howling for a good, 30 minutes. Yep, while he was waiting for me to show up. So there's a lot of stuff out there. My mother had said, "You're going to bring bear spray, aren't you?" So I had looked into that, but I actually cheap. I was, it was expensive. It's like $50. And I'm figuring I'm not going to be able to activate it unless I wear it on my person if I encounter a bear. And by the time I fumbled for it, I probably crashed my dirt bike. And so I opted not to do that. But there was definitely, in the middle of the night in some of those areas, you're a little concerned about what you might encounter on the trail. So, but luckily nothing that would, that would eat me. So I
Yeah,
lucked out.
that's pretty great. Well, that's exactly what Lee said. If you don't make it by 7 o'clock to that checkpoints, there are bears and wolves and who knows what else in the forest. So I was a little worried for all the riders and drivers who came in late after midnight. So it's great to hear that that things worked out well for you. And so kind of one of the other bigger questions that I have is how did you perceive creativity being used on that ride from the start to the finish and different sections? Like, what does creativity mean for you when you're riding?
Um, I think I thought a little bit about this because I had an opportunity to hear what Etienne and um, uh, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the name of the other rider off
Pat,
the top of my head. Pat, right?
Pat,
Um, sorry, it was
Pat.
Pat. What they answered for this because I think for me there's two things: creative problem solving. There were a few times where I did get stuck. There was one time where I second guessed my instinct, and I thought this can't possibly be the trail that I'm supposed to take because it isn't actually a trail. Thank you, Lee. And I ended up going through the woods. And one of the challenges with the GPS is that if there's a lot of coverage or foliage, it doesn't always uh, reconcile right away. So sometimes you start down a path and then you realize that you're on the wrong path, or it doesn't pick up the that you're following. So I went in circles. So it's that creative problem solving, and how do you fix that? Or when I did come off my bike, I had a few crashes. I got stuck a couple of times, like with the bridge, and how do I solve that problem? So that's very much like mental gymnastics and physical gymnastics. And so I think there's a level of creativity with that. The other aspect, though, that I feel is the creative component is the spontaneity, and that you have to be so present and in the moment. And I think that's why most of us ride is because of that. You haven't got any extra brain power to think about your job or the stuff that's stressing you out at home. You have to be so focused on the terrain and what you're doing, and looking ahead, and picking the right line choice, that I feel that that's the creative aspect of it for me, is allowing yourself to be in that moment and be spontaneous and reactive to your environment, and not fight the environment, right? And so that to me it requires some creativity, and it's wonderful. I mean, it's a fantastic feeling. So yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. So much of our creativity depends on how we see things, and if we have certain amount of information to be creative with. Because I always think that you can be creative if you have enough. Like, let's say you can be creative with art if you have enough art media, enough crayons or enough paints. If you don't have enough, you have to get creative, creating those supplies. So it's
Mhm.
very interesting. And so the next question out of that, have you noticed if there are any lasting effects of that creativity or that approach that you can take from the trail to your everyday life?
I would say the one thing that's sort of been apparent to me since this event is, you go through the phase where I was a little in awe of the whole thing. It took a while, a few days to process the accomplishment, to really understand what I had done and how it had affected me. Because when you're also in the moment, you're not processing that, or you're living it, and you don't understand sort of the longer term implications of it. So it took me a while to feel that. And I think it's that you have to, at some point when you're out there riding, especially by yourself, you just have to relinquish yourself and say, there's nothing more I can do and control other than what I'm doing now, and just relinquish yourself to the experience. And so that I feel has lasted. And I don't feel as stressed, and maybe it's because I'm not worrying about riding the Dacre anymore. um, but I would say that's the only, after I had physically recovered, which for that the Dacre for that first event didn't take a long time, which was awesome. My recovery from the Northeast 24-hour race was longer. But the only thing that I'm feeling now is I've gotten to that point. It's like, what do I do now? what's the next challenge? And and how can I do something like this again and still keep my relationship with Ian? And you know, what's the next big test? Because the reason I wanted to do this is because I don't know if I can. And there are things like I'm a white woman living in Canada, in North America. I'm probably, as privileged as one can be. And so I need these challenges to test myself and see, am I really mentally strong? Am I, able to do this? And so I am definitely driven and motivated by things like that. So there's also that depression that comes when you come back from vacation. It's the same thing. It's like, okay, I've been so focused on this for so long that now I'm depressed because I don't have another goal. I mean, there's events. The Corduroy Enduro is a pretty challenging event. There's some great women's rides that I'm going to do, and trips down to Pennsylvania, that kind of thing. But it's not the same as having a challenge where I learn something about myself in a challenging way.
Yeah, I really love that you mentioned the relinquishing control, because that speaks to me of surrender, surrendering to the spirit, to the universe, to the nature, whatever. And it definitely helps in our everyday life, because it reduces the importance of things. And when you reduce importance, you're much more connected to things, and you're much more able to accomplish whatever the goals they're set. And it's funny you mentioned depression, because astronauts were found to have this strong depression after they come back from space, after seeing all that and the Earth from the space, and they come back and couldn't really deal with that. And the same with Olympic athletes. And
Mhm,
in my research, I know that when our highs are too high, the lows become too low. So the challenge
mhm,
then becomes, well, how can we manage that high so it doesn't get too much, so that after
mhm,
the end of the event, the low doesn't get to the critical point. And that is kind of one of the biggest challenges that I see, that all athletes, endurance athletes and whatnot, have to deal with, so that they can maintain their performance, their creativity, their focus, and everything else like that. And
mhm,
that's very critical. And so in closing, I guess this is so much information here, and I hope that listeners are really gonna get a glimpse of what it's like to participate in that kind of event. And so if you had to have a message, if you have a message of some sort for those who ride, or those who maybe don't ride and never thought about that, just in general, as even to women who might not be even thinking that it might be possible for them, what would be your message in general?
mhm. So if I can do it, anybody can do it. There is nothing special about me. I don't have natural dirt biking talent. I may have some natural balance and athletic ability from a lifetime of doing sports, but I'm not. I have to work hard to develop my skills. It doesn't come easy to me. And so if for me, I would encourage people to don't wait until everything is aligned and it's perfect, because that will never come. Do what you need to do to prepare and be safe and to give yourself the best chance at success, but don't put it off. You don't know what is going to happen tomorrow, and if you allow fear or the challenge or the difficulty for entry into a sport like this. And there's a lot of obstacles with dirt biking. It's expensive. There's not a ton of women doing it more now, which is amazing. Um, don't let that deter you if you really feel that it's something that you can be passionate about. And there are a lot of women that ask me about racing, and they're, yep, I want to race next year or the year after, and I need to practice. It's like, yeah, but go do it. Like, we're in Ontario. We're not in the US where you've got, 1,000 people showing up for a club race, right? It's like, don't put off those opportunities. The Dacre is a bigger deal, I think. It's requires a lot more commitment. But I think I'm the first woman to have soloed it, which is great. That's also something that motivated me to try it. But I know other women have done it, or maybe we could see a women's team one of these years. That would be amazing. But don't let the enormity And the size of that goal puts you off from starting. You just go start, go try it. Because like I said, I'm not special. It just takes some drive and work, and anybody can do this, and it's worth it because it's an amazing sport and an amazing community. Um, yeah, I don't know what I would do if I'd never discovered dirt biking. Life would be far less exciting than it is. That's for sure. So get
Yeah,
out there and ride, and leave the road. No offense to road riders, but it's the trails are a whole different thing. And dirt biking and enduro riding is just a different experience. And so I would really encourage someone to try it for sure.
yeah, it's a beautiful message. And what I discovered observing that event is that it wasn't so much about being trying to be the best in the class, even though people were aspiring to finish in their class at the top. But overall, it was all about the experience, all about internal growth and development that happens on the trail when nobody sees what you're doing. It was all about personal development, really. And at the end, when people came, it didn't really matter what place they came in.
Mhm.
First of all, everybody was greeted equally, and second of all, the amount of change that has happened in a person after that event did not really matter which place they finished, as long as they finished. And even though those who didn't quite finish, they still felt that accomplishment of doing that. And I think it's important. I think it's important on many levels for us as humans to develop in this area, which includes community, which is great community. Great shout out to Rally Connects, Lee Martin, Valley
Yeah.
Rally Enduro. Those people really brought others together. So there's that aspect. And
Mhm.
there's a creativity aspect, which keeps evolving when you're spending so much time in nature. And then there's, of course, the focus and physical athletic performance. So all of that together, I think it's very important for people to
Mhm.
participate in things like that.
And it's interesting that you talk about, like I didn't, you don't know who's attending either, right? So there weren't as many bike riders as I thought there would be this year, and I think it's a little bit different. And each year there's going to be more interest or less. I know there were a lot of side by sides, and that was interesting, riding with them as well. But my only goal was to finish this event, and I didn't know if I could, and I also learned in the journey, and what I really took away from this is that even if I would have been disappointed if I hadn't have finished, but I it was the first time ever that I have given what I like 100%. Like there was I would have I would have been disappointed if I hadn't have finished, but I also couldn't have done anything differently than I did. And there's like you said, there's an acceptance there that I have done all I can do to be successful in this event, and it doesn't detract from that if I don't finish at that point, because I couldn't have done anything different. I just wasn't it wasn't enough that day, but I was very lucky that it was enough just. So I would say to people, whether you finished or didn't finish, for those that are going to try it for the first time next year, you just if you do all you can do and you give 100%, and this is true in life as well, it there's nothing more you can ask of yourself, and there's almost like a serenity that comes with that I hadn't felt before. So that's something that I want to try and recreate again. And so, I need to find another challenge, and where you can test yourself and learn more about yourself. And there's very few events like that though here in Ontario. So, please, Lee, keep putting on these amazing events, because they really are something very special happened at the Dacre this year for everybody, individually and as a collective as well. It's a really special event.
Yeah, I agree. And I was so fortunate to be at the very first, that was my very first Dacre event, and it turned out amazing. And to hear you say that there was something special going on, it definitely was. And I come from the background of motorsports on a road racing course, and I know what kind of pressures and challenges people deal with there. And the disappointment of not finishing the way that they expected to finish is much greater which I
Mhm.
completely did not see at this event. When there's no competition and you're
Mhm.
competing only with yourself, it completely changes the game.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was pretty remarkable, and and I don't know if there are other events like that around, and I know you're trying to wrap it up, but I always have too much to say. It was very different though than the next 24-hour event I did. That was very much more a race, and it wasn't a point to point. It was laps of a 10-mile course, and it was very different and challenging in a different way. And so there is something like that you just mentioned, that something magical happens when you're just out there riding for you and by yourself, and not look like it's a competition. Don't get me wrong, I'm always competitive, I always want to do well, but I wasn't even thinking about winning anything, right? The win for me was just finishing. But it's having people that just the amount of effort that went into this event. And I have to thank everybody. When I came in at 4 a.m., I was expecting to come in, be there with Ian, and then go to my van and try and sleep. But everybody was still up, and you guys just made it amazing coming in at 4 o'clock in the morning and having some, people there to cheer you. That was awesome. So thank you. I know you were one of them, and thanks to the rest of the crew for staying up and being there to help me across the finish line.
Yeah, I was barely awake, but I had to jump out and come and meet you because it was like the last person, and it was very
Yep.
exciting.
Yeah.
And well, we still have a little bit of time, so let's briefly look at the comparison between your event that was after and the Dacre. What was the biggest difference that you saw?
I don't like to do laps. I don't. I like to have new territory. So the advantage of riding laps is that you become familiar with the course, so you know what to expect. There were probably 1,000 riders at this event. A lot of them are teams, so at any one point in time, there's probably 300 riders on the course. It was very dry, and it was a new location. This is the third time I've done this race, and it was so dry and dusty that during the day and at night, visibility was zero when people passed you. And so you have team riders that are fresh. They're riding a couple of laps as fast as they can, and they hand off to the next competitor, or like their teammate. And then you have the solo riders that are, they're riding continuously. And so, I'm not moving as fast as these team riders, obviously. And so, they go by you at 100 miles an hour, and I had to stop sometimes because I just couldn't see through the dust. And at night, that became really sketchy and quite scary for me personally. So I did a couple of night laps, and then, I said, I need to take a break here because I'm going to injure myself or go off course or have a problem. So I don't know, a lot of respect to those riders that kept going, through those types of conditions, because I don't know how they could see. And I had, like yellow coated lights to make it easier to see in the dust, and I couldn't see anything. So it's a very different mindset. It's however many laps you can complete in a 24-hour period. You can come and pit as often as you like. So I would try and ride 2 or 3 laps before I'd come in, and pit. You can rest if you want to. So but you're moving a lot faster. So I was riding at more of a race pace, and it felt like a 24-hour cross country race, as opposed to the Dacre, which was just, it was just much more pleasant at the Dacre. The scenery is better. It's fresh scenery all the time, so you don't know what you're about to get when it comes to trails. Whereas this, oh yeah, that creek bed, it got me last time, or this hill climb is really challenging, and I've got it's coming up, and you'd learn the course, so you'd know where those pain points are in the course. And keeping in mind too that every time 300 riders have done a lap, the course degrades quite quickly as well. So the ruts become deeper. And so the terrain isn't super challenging, but those factors make it more challenging as the race wears on. You definitely feel pushed to ride fast. Um, and the recovery for me after the race was done, I had much more discomfort. My muscles were much sore, and I think it's because I was traveling faster, and there were, a lot of steep downhills and uphills, and you're just pushing. So it was a very, it's not the terrain that I enjoy. It's not the format of racing that I enjoy. Having said that, it's one of the greatest events. The camaraderie, the atmosphere in the pits is amazing. You see a lot of the same people, and you see people you haven't seen in many years, especially because of COVID. It had been a few years since I was able to go. So there's a lot of camaraderie and community around this event. So I would highly recommend it to people if they want to try it. And because it's a closed course, it's a good way to kind of dip your feet into longer endurance riding, because you can ride as little or as much as you like. But it's definitely a different format that, impacted. And I didn't enjoy the ride nearly as much as I enjoyed the Dacre. And it was physically, it had took a bigger toll. And maybe that's because it was, you know, less than a week later. Maybe I hadn't fully recovered from the Dacre, but I did feel good going into it, and I felt great, until the afternoon. You start at 10 a.m., so you start in daylight, and then you ride a longer like night section. But yeah, very different events. Very different events.
And what's the name of it, and how many kilometers was that second event?
It's called the Northeast 24-Hour Challenge, and it takes place in New York. This new location is in Odessa, so it's only about 4.5 hours from Toronto, which is great. And so it was about a 10-mile loop, and you ride it as many times as you can. So basically, I did 16 laps in that time, and so it was about 160 miles. So again, not as long a distance either, but physically, that was I felt it was more challenging for those reasons. And mentally, you get bored. You get, it's mind numbing sometimes. And one of the riders, there were a couple of amazing Iron women that they're just hardcore, and I have the utmost respect. One of them is Erin Harper, who's a Canadian, and has raced with me in Canada before, and then Mallory Eberhardt was the winner of the event. And these women, just at one point, one of them said, posted, I think, a video of herself, and she said, this is what a zombie looks like, riding a dirt bike. And it must have been probably at 4 or 5 in the morning. And because it's just, you're doing the same thing over and over again. So I find, for me, psychologically, that is much more torturous than riding into the unknown and point to point, like at the Dacre. It's just, yeah. So just for me and my personality, it wasn't as enjoyable an event. But I'm very glad I did it, and I probably won't be doing it again for a while. Although I would love to take a Canadian women's team there one year, and ride with a Canadian team. But we'll see. Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely the difference between always having a new terrain and nothing that ever repeats versus something that is similar is quite different. The approach would be quite different to that. So it's
Mhm,
interesting to consider the comparison.
mhm.
So, no, thank you so much for all of this experiential sharing of the experiential knowledge. It is so wonderful to hear all of those observations and thoughts and ideas that come out of it. It's just food for thought for weeks after. So I hope the listeners got lots out of this. And thank you once again, Lee Martin and Rally Connects and Valley Rally Enduro and everybody who was participating and supporting this event. It was great. And hopefully you will all enjoyed that. And we'll see you next time.